Let's do it. Barcelona beating Real Madrid 5-2 in El Clásico, 91,553 people, a world record at a women's football match, all happening at the Camp Nou. There is an argument for Barcelona, Real Madrid to become a proper El Clásico, with Atletico Madrid dropping their level a bit and not keeping up. And it was a reminder to me, Emile, not to say how long I've been hosting the show now, but even in the 5 years since I started talking about the Femení, Real Madrid, not only did they not exist, but even CD Tacon for a while before Real Madrid even entered the fray. Now we're talking 3-4 years ago. There was only, and it wasn't even really an El Clásico. It was that Atletico Madrid and Barcelona would seemingly trade power. Who had the better players, and they would go, and players would switch and swap, and then whichever team had the better players would, we'll say, rule that era, and then it was just handed back like a baton, right? But it was never really the either one.
Last decade was a little bit almost like whoever had Jenny Hermoso won the title.
Basically, yes. I'm getting to that. A ping pong of Jenny Hermoso. So this record beats the previous record of 90,185 people at the 1999 World Cup final. So we're talking World Cup women's matches.
It's crazy.
About club. We're talking anything. 91,553 people is also the most people that were at the Camp Nou this season, regardless of match, regardless of competition.
Yes.
That was the most that were in attendance. So, Emile, you were one of, so without you, there was 91,552 people, but because there, what was it? What were the vibes? What was the atmosphere? Very rarely, from my couch and from my little studio here, do I care about that. But yeah, you were there. It seemed like the atmosphere was even beyond what we could comprehend.
Yeah, so it was, so I had partly out of convenience, but so it's about a half an hour, 35-minute walk from my apartment to the stadium. So I did the walk, and it was about halfway, 2/3 of the way through. You started seeing people, and it was, men, women, kids, just all sexes, ages, everything, Barca scarves and the jerseys on and stuff. And slowly, as you walk down on Diagonal, kind of towards the stadium, it was almost, there was like more and more kind of the contingent of ball ground. I sort of grew as you got closer. By the time you got to the stadium, it was, it was literally as crowded as I've ever seen around Camp Nou, but there was really a vibe. I've never been to a massive, like a Champions League game at Camp Nou or anything like that. But this was the most kind of buzzy. It was just, there was a palpable excitement even in the last, I would say maybe quarter, a third of a mile walking up to the stadium, let alone once you got inside. And inside, I think the best thing about it was it had a massive big game vibe to it. No one, obviously everyone was there because it was, the Femení and things like that. But at no point did it feel like we were here to make up numbers, or it was some sort of like gimmicky, let's break this record sort of thing. This was El Clásico. We were here for a Champions League game to send Real Madrid home. And that was that, and none of it felt the least bit, I don't know. It all felt so organic. It was so sincere and so earnest. And, once the momentum just started with just the singing and the chanting with kickoff and that ovation, it never really let up. I would say in all honesty, for probably 80 of the 90 minutes, the entire crowd, or the vast majority, we were on our feet, singing, shouting, like a lot of bouncing, and it felt like it felt momentous for reasons that had nothing to do with the head count in the stadium, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. Alexia Putellas, before the match, kind of called it. She said that this was going to be a before and after moment for women's football, and she definitely has an argument for that because, and I'll say this in a really cynical way, is that I saw this online, that if one ticket on average at that Camp Nou match last night sold for 10 euros, then that match was worth to the club 100,000 euros at the gate. If that was, we're just, again, for numbers' sake, making it simple to say that if every ticket was worth 10 euros, then it was 100,000 euros for that match. And so with
900,000. So we're saying 10 euros particular, right?
Yeah. So that would be, So
yeah,
900,000. Yeah.
Yeah. Close to a million
Right.
euros.
Yeah. Right. And thank you for that. Yeah. So
Mm.
way more than anything I said. So, yeah. So in that context, again, the cynical part of this is that those, old crotchety men who make those decisions and everything comes down to money and bottom line and the great argument, because we could argue about the significance of women's football or all the nonsense about on the field or whatever, and what we say doesn't truly matter other than what we do, and that's showing
Yep.
up and tuning in and putting eyeballs on it and putting butts in the seats or Kool-Aids in the seats and showing
Yep.
that there is a support behind the game and that people are willing to spend their money on the game. And that's
Yep.
going to take all of these old men that, were wondering on whether or not it was possible, because and the great irony with the women's team is they don't fill up that 6,000 person Johan Cruyff Stadium, but the event, the proper marketing that was done, the support, the backing, the fact that weeks leading up to this match, the club was supporting it, the city was all saying, hey, this is going to be an event.
Yes.
And if you can create an event out of a sporting event, right? Or you can make it a special event leading up to a moment, then you can get this kind of response. And as I said, this response equaled the bottom line. It equaled $1 or euro rather, and many euros. And that's the kind of thing to say that, oh, your investment in women's football is going to pay off. And so it's no surprise that this is Barcelona versus Real Madrid, because Real Madrid, as much as we detest them, they might have been a little later to the party than Barca, but Barca were also, well, quote unquote, late to the party as well. They were 15, 20 years behind some of the other programs that have been going on in women's football, and the way the clubs are investing in their women's teams. I mean, again, Lyon, Wolfsburg, those examples, and it's just at the grassroots level. So for all of this support to be poured into the Barca Femení, and then in tandem, Real Madrid, it's creating something. It's creating an event. It's creating that rivalry on the women's side of things. And I'm just so excited for what this could mean moving forward, showing that women's football can create an event and women's football can be important to their it's so cynical to say that, but that's really what this before and after moment is.
Look, I think, and look, there's a little bit of that, and it, in light of kind of all the moments and all the snapshots and the sort of the, frankly, almost like the perfection that was last night, there's that element of it that, look, this was probably initially conceived by the club or Joan Laporta or whoever's brainchild this was. This was probably initially conceived as probably a way to make some money. And I understand in the context of the monumental debt that we talk about, like making $1 million when you owe $1 billion is, it doesn't do much. But I understand too. And I think there was also a sense that we can establish ourselves as the rulers of the women's club game now.
What are we talking?
We have access to the largest stadium. We have a mobile and enthusiastic fan base who, I don't know if they expected 91,000, but they probably figured they would get a large and spirited crowd.
Oh, and I'm saying beyond this though. I think we're going to really focus on the Femení, but I'm saying beyond this. I'm saying if you're Bayern Munich and PSG,
100%.
And if you're Chelsea and you're Man City and you're Arsenal and you're Manchester United, this should be a lesson to you that put them at Old Trafford, put them at Stamford Bridge, put them at the Allianz Arena, and
100%.
Give your women's teams the platforms to not equal this number, because it's, again, the Camp Nou is just something different in Europe. It's the biggest stadium in Europe.
It's just literally bigger.
Correct.
Although I was thinking that Florentino Perez is going to pay every Madridista he can find to fill the Bernabeu, and probably tether 1,000 overloaded hot air balloons to lay claim to the record.
Believe it or not, like as much as I detest everything that the man does, that is good thing for women's football. Trying to
100%,
and creating this duopoly in Spanish football is great, because that was also the worry that this women's team isn't truly tested. And I guess, we can pivot to talking about what actually happened in the match and gave you something to cheer about, but also gave you a question of having to be able to watch an enjoyable match that actually not say required a comeback in the tie, but was technically a comeback in the match itself. And going in, there was no Licky Martins, no Asiswala, And the big question for this Femení team, for those who haven't been following along this year, health will be the key to this team potentially repeating as Champions League winners. That's it. They're the best team in Europe. They're the most talented team still. But if they are not healthy and do not have the depth required when the matches truly come down to it, then they may not win the Champions League again. I want to warn everybody with that.
Yeah, I mean, it was so what was interesting about the game, they started strong. They got on the board, what was it, 8 minutes in, I think. And the team itself actually looked great coming out. I would say maybe the first 3 or 4 minutes, there probably is a sense of, I guess in the most practical, literal sense, they have never played in this big a stadium, packed to the gills as it was, that loud, with the horns and the whistles and the whole thing.
Saw what Caroline Graham-Hansen said, right? She gave a really, really emotional post-match.
Yes.
Interview, and she said that it was unbelievable. Like she couldn't, they had to kind of shake that off of what that was. They couldn't imagine what was happening.
And there was a little bit of a sense of that. And I think there was, because, they would be kind of good for 2 or 3 passes and maybe half to 2/3 of a move. And then a pass would just be a little bit off, a half step ahead of somebody or just a half a second late or something. I think a little bit, not that Madrid ever actually challenged the area or the Barca goal in any consistent way, or at all for that matter. But I think the fact that for the Madrid players also, the whole thing, like this atmosphere of you're getting whistled when you're getting whistled by 80, 90,000 people when you have the ball, which has got to be a completely alien feeling. So I think that also, I think everyone needed a few minutes to sort of gain their footing and find some manner of comfort zone. And I think on top of that, I think Femení were understandably very eager to come out and just play very slickly and sort of take the game to Madrid and put on a show. I think, to sort of hold up their end of making this thing into a massive event. And I mean, I'll be honest, when they got on the board after 8 minutes, I was like, okay, cool. So that's, in my mind, I kind of figured, okay, so that's game. And then for the next, I'd say maybe 3 or 4 minutes, honestly, just until Madrid got the penalty, they had everything but the finish. I mean, they were penetrating the area left and right, and just the crosses were slightly off, or I think there was a decent save in there somewhere. And it felt like the 1 was going to become 3 very quickly, and we'd be off to the races after that. But yeah, I think there was a little bit of I don't even know. I mean, it has to feel a little bit overwhelming when, no matter how as great as these players are, I mean, this is a stadium that is, orders of magnitude larger than where they usually play. And it is completely packed. And, the fever pitch was, I'm going to try to find words to put it in, but it was constant. It was 80, 90 minutes of jumping up and down, the horns, the whistles, the singing, the chanting, the whole thing. And, it probably takes a second to get your brain around that.
Well, yeah, I go back to the comments again that was made before by Alexia, by Jenny Hermoso, by Caroline Graham-Hansen, just that they understood, especially where what was it, 82,000 of those tickets were sold out within 3 days of being put out when it was first released, right? And so these players fully understood the responsibility, I think, which unfair to them, but I think they felt this responsibility they had to, you're right, to show out that, hey, maybe more than just Femení fans, because it's not even all Kool-Aid, it's not even all Barca fans care about the Femení, right? Like there are people who, I mean, we're 15, 16 minutes in, so I can say those who aren't listening at this point, right? Like, and there are Kool-Aids that aren't listening, and so for them to know and understand the magnitude of what a big performance or classy finishes or really good goals could mean, right? Because even Mappy Leon, the first goal of the game was a cross, not a shot.
Yes.
And yet it finds the back of the net and it works out. But you could tell then Graham-Hansen was just up to it the whole match. You could tell like she had a weight on her, but she was I mean, and these players, these Femení players, if anything, if there are players capable of taking on the responsibility and being just as good as advertised and showing out and putting on that show, it's these players like
It's them, yeah.
who was the main protagonist. But then the goal happens, which I'm not going to say it's a good thing, but because this Femení team is, we'll talk again in Champions League final or semifinal, but against this Real Madrid team, a team that they beat 9-0 within a few weeks, and they did struggle a little bit at the in Madrid last week, but it was cool to me that this was a bit of a match. Like I can't believe I wasn't rooting for Real Madrid by any means, but it was definitely a handball on Paredes, who was one of the best defenders in all of Europe, as evidenced last year when she won the award. But Olga Carmona gets the 1-1, right? And I have to say too, good on Madrid for trying to press as hard as they did, pushing forward that back line and trying to play a high line.
They played hard. I mean, they weren't kind of covering up and just hoping to minimize the damage at any point. I mean, they were going into tackles hard. Like you said, they were pressing, and they couldn't conjure much of an attack, which actually, you mentioned both of the players who sort of stood out for me as the best last night were Muppy Leon and Caroline Graham-Hansen.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And there was only so far that Madrid could go before it was just like shut down. Like, you will not pass. And to their credit, I mean, they kept trying to, and they weren't doing any kind of they weren't trying to play it long or anything like that. They were legitimately trying to find cracks and find holes through the Barca defense, but they just, it simply wasn't there. But yeah, I mean, they played, and, and after they scored to equalize in the first half, that last sort of half hour of the first half, I mean, Barca were, of course, on balance, the better team, but you'd be hard pressed to say that they were necessarily deserving of another goal. I mean, they didn't create that many sort of, gilt edged chances in the latter half hour of the first half. And then when you come out of the locker room, there's already that little bit of like, well, this is weird. Why are we tied at home when we scored after 8 minutes? And then what is it? 3 minutes later, you get chipped from, 45 yards out or whatever it is. At no point did I actually think that Barca were going to lose that match. But I remember when that went in thinking, don't tell me, like, the sports gods have just a depraved sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And I was like, don't you dare tell me that on this night. So the first thought that went through my mind, and this is deep in the annals, but I was like, don't tell me this is like the Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas moment where, just no one has even contemplated the possibility of defeat. It's more so we're going to judge you on how stylish your victory is. Yeah. And suddenly we're dealing with these new permutations that weren't even in the equation before.
Well, I keep doing the Duke North Carolina college basketball thing right now for those in the U.S.
Yeah, the Coach K thing, yeah.
Where North Carolina beats Coach K in his, in that final home game at Cameron Indoor Stadium. So it's a huge thing that North Carolina sours that moment. But now these two teams meeting in the Final Four.
Yes.
And people are wondering, has there ever been a bigger Duke North Carolina match with this? But this is Coach K's last game ever, right? This is bigger. And this match, again, it felt like that a little bit too, in that this is Barcelona, Real Madrid in El Clásico. For when that goal was scored, for me, it felt like the first time. Like, I know these two teams have faced off before, but it's going to be a little bit, I think, before Real Madrid still gets a result against the Barca Femení. But when Claudia Zornoza's long-range effort, you're right, chips uncharacteristically poor goalkeeping from Sandra Paños for the 2-1. Like, in that moment, I'm like, oh, okay, so this Champions League tie, that Alexia Putellas late goal from the first leg looking gigantic at this moment.
Right? Yeah.
Because now they're at least they're still up 3-2 at that point. But then you're right. There was that flip. I mean, that switch was completely flipped. Aitana Bonmati, who had been kind of quiet from her. I mean, from her perspective, for the player who was I mean, she was the woman of the match in the Champions League final last year. She's been so consistent this year when healthy. So the immediate answer from her, Hermoso feeds her, and just a calm and classy finish.
She was so, I was going to say, that was so cool. I mean, she just sort of strolled, I say strolled in. I mean, she made her way in. She eluded defenders, but it felt like she just sort of, it was like she had decided that things needed to be set straight. Yeah. And just, we need to restore the natural order. And she just went, and it was almost the equivalent of dunking on someone. Like, she just went in and she was like, okay, fine, you're not leading anymore, at least, like, now we can actually get down to the task at hand, and we don't have to drag this out. We don't have to worry about trailing you guys for 15 minutes and, even giving this a moment's thought anymore.
Yeah. And then the third one, Claudio Pina, a reminder that she's still just 20 years old. And I really didn't think when she went to Sevilla last year on loan, I wasn't sure where her future was going to lie, just because of how deep, as I said, Martins and Swallow weren't playing in this match. But with all the injuries that have occurred for the Femení this year, Pina has been so essential. And she's been hurt herself, but she's been so essential to that depth up top. And then when Bruna Villamala, the other young striker for the Femení, goes down, you needed somebody to just, I mean, as much as this team wins 5 or 6 every single match seemingly in Spain, and they've won every single one, they won the league with 6 games remaining, you still need, who's scoring those 5 or 6 goals, right? So if you're missing all your forwards,
you still have to, you still need someone to score them.
Someone has to be scoring those, right? It's not going to just be Sandra Panos or whoever's still healthy. So yeah, I mean, I was uncertain about her last year with Sevilla. She was, I mean, I think she's the most highly touted. And again, the understanding of youth football in women's Spanish youth football is like, in its infancy, but she was really the first one I had heard of. We heard about her about 15, 16 years old. So about 4 or 5 years ago, just I was starting the pod, right? I was doing those La Masia profiles on Barca Block. I was digging deep, watching Cadet U16s for the men, or the U19s for the boys, Oz. And so the only real name that I could find that had any kind of footing for the women's academy, which again has made huge strides again in the 4 or 5 years, was Pina. Villamala wasn't really too much on her. And then Jana Fernandez, who was unfortunately one of the other young players who was out for the season with a knee injury as well. So I hope she gets healthy for next year, but she's also part of the future. But for Pina to score that goal, right, that 3-2, it again felt like, okay, Barcelona, even though Hermosa is in her 30s and, she still got quite a few years at the top, but Pina is going to be there. She'll be there the minute if also Swallow decides to move on or Martins decides to move on. You have she's right there. And an absolutely wonderful finish as well, just like the Atana Bonmati, where I'm watching that and I'm saying, hey, this is a goal that is a highlight. It's not just like a ceremonial penalty kick or just kind of goal. Like when somebody watches the highlights from that match, Zornoza's effort, awesome, from 30, 40 yards out. And then, as I said, Aitana's goal, great. Pina's goal, absolutely, again, terrific.
It was left shoulder, gorgeous.
In the top corner. Yes, fantastic. And then
you couldn't place it any more perfectly. Like if they let you place it with your hand, but you'd pick that trajectory for it to go in. I mean, there was not even just a hint of. There wasn't a hint of sort of luck or keeper error about that. She just put it somewhere where you can't get to it. And, it was kind of you have to tip your cap to the attacker when they do it that well type of moment.
Yeah. And then the pressure continues to at that point, Barcelona, you felt like they took that breath. They knew it was over. So then Alexia adds the 4th, and then Rolfo crosses in for CGH for the 5th. And Rolfo, to go back to Rolfo, like Alexia Butey, it's not she hasn't been as good as she was last year, but last year she was the figure. She was the main protagonist every single time. But as we mentioned, like this year, you've seen Caroline Graham-Hansen be just as good or arguably as bad. I mean, I think she might have felt like because she wasn't named in that top 5 in that short list for the Ballon d'Or, I think Caroline Graham-Hansen, she wrote some names down, right? I mean, 3 of those are her own teammates, but she did. But she wanted to write down the names of all the other players who weren't playing for her own team. And then the addition of Rolfo over the summer, you and I talked about that, and I was, coming over from Wolfsburg, she wasn't really a goal scorer. She seemed to be a bit more, we'll say, physical, or she can dig in defensively, was a bit of her reputation. But I didn't think she'd fit as seamlessly well as she did. And again, going back
Yeah.
to injuries this season, Rolfo has been consistently healthy and consistently showed up. She's played on the wing. She's played center forward. She's basically played anywhere she's had to.
I was just going to say
so
she's been everything that the club has needed her to be. I mean, both in terms of, like you said, out of just sheer necessity, out of the need of, just able bodies, but also just in her. I mean, I think even when they recruited her, when they brought her in, I don't know that did they know just how kind of versatile and just what an absolute Swiss Army knife she is. I mean, she is spectacular. I mean, she's been, and I guess that's the thing. When I say spectacular, she's not always spectacular, but she's just spectacular. And like you said, she's always present. She's always capable, never makes a mistake, which is such a massive trait, and yeah, she was fantastic.
Yeah, she doesn't really fit in a certain box where she's not just like Graham Hansen. If you give her any space on the touchline, she's going to be to the goal line, right? I mean, she's just a winger's winger. That being Graham Hansen, also has an ability to score. But yeah, Rolfo, her finishing is suspect at times. She's not going to dribble 1v1 versus an outside back, but also she can do those things. She can score and pop up. She can't, right? So there are comparisons a bit to the way that Ferran Torres plays for the men's team, where Rolfo just finds space and create space herself. Again, she's also just she can be a bit of a superior athlete at times to her opposition, especially in the Spanish league. So she can just use her physical tools to gain that advantage. So yeah, I mean, the team has already won the league with 6 games remaining, and now all eyes are, I hope, on that next round, right? I mean, I think it would be stupid not to say, hey, we're going to do the next one. It depends on.
They've already announced they are.
Right. So the next one's at the end. It's smart to do it. Again, it's more revenue, but it also, again, if they can keep this momentum through, and if the Femení in particular can win this, not to say that the Femení have pushed women's football forward, but you could tell the internet yesterday was watching and understanding what had just taken place. And I think, again, happening at the Camp Nou, and that number itself, that 91,553, that number carried so much weight in the conversations yesterday that said many people, it was a world record. This many people cared about women's football yesterday in one location. And yeah, it was a Clásico, but the Femení, now you could see that they're ready for this responsibility of carrying that torch forward for, I'm not saying international women's football, because the Women's World Cup is gigantic as well.
But that's big. That's already big in its own right.
As far as carrying the club torch, they are carrying this club torch. And I think it would actually be a help. I can't believe I'm saying it this way, but I think it would be actually a benefit and a help for this Femení team to be repeat back-to-back Women's Champions League winners.
100%.
I think it would be for them to carry this momentum from this world record all the way through to the finals. I think would be helpful.